Welcome back to the channel, everyone. We're going to be talking about the Samsung Galaxy Note 5 today and pretty much seeing how it holds up in 2020. Now, there's a lot of cool advantages for the Note 5 and there's some disadvantages, but I think overall this was one of the more interesting phones that Samsung ever released for their Note line, and I would probably add that it was probably one of the most important. When you have a phone like this, especially with the Samsung Galaxy Note 5, you have to remember that even though it took away a lot of things, really the main selling point of this phone was the premiumness factor of this phone. We're looking at basically going from the Note 4 to the Note 5, the advantages that we had, and there were a lot of advantages for sure. Now, what I said in this intro might already be kind of common sense, but just because the Note 5 depreciated in value and all these different things doesn't mean it's still worth it in 2020, and doesn't mean it's not worth it, you know what I mean? When the Samsung Galaxy Note 5 came out, it was selling for almost near $1,000, maybe around $899, around that price tag. Right now, you can pick it up on Amazon for about $147, and on eBay probably a little bit cheaper, but even at that, I probably would not recommend picking up the Note 5. I think a phone like the Google Pixel 2 XL that I've been recommending a lot more, I think a phone like that has a lot more value up its sleeve than a Samsung Galaxy Note 5, and throughout this video I'll explain exactly why. I don't think the Note 5 is a horrible phone in 2020, but I just think even for $150 for what you're getting from a phone like that, I don't even think it's worth that much if I'm being completely honest. Now, this thing came out in 2015, so that was actually 5 years ago, which is pretty insane. It honestly does not feel like it's been 5 years. It honestly feels like it's been probably 2 years or something like that since this thing came out, but it came out 5 years ago, which is pretty crazy. On the front of this thing, you have a 5.7-inch Super AMOLED display. It is a 1440p display, and this is probably one of its biggest selling points ever. This has one of the nicest displays ever for a older phone that I've seen, especially from the 2015 era. The Galaxy Note 4 was really good too, but that had kind of a weird build quality to it. This one has a much better build quality and a much better screen in my opinion. That's one of the biggest advantages for this phone, would definitely be that panel. Well, one thing you have to consider is that with a lot of Samsung phones and even OLED phones in general, when you're buying a used OLED phone like a Galaxy Note 5, especially from this time ago, you have to consider that your phone will probably end up having burn-in or getting burn-in or whatever the case is. On my Galaxy Note 5, I do have burn-in, and on a majority of Galaxy Note 5s that I've seen on the market, about 90% of them, all of those phones have some sort of burn-in on it, which doesn't really look too good for the Note 5. I mean, it's a horrible thing. It's one of the most annoying things ever, but that is a humongous thing you have to consider when buying a Samsung Galaxy Note 5. You have to look at the burn-in factor of this thing too. Now, if you're going to replace the screen or whatever, that's a whole different story. That is one huge thing you have to consider when picking up a phone like this. Also, there was some delamination going on with that top part of the screen. It's not the end of the world, but that is a huge thing to consider when picking up this phone. Now, this thing also has a S Pen on the bottom, which is really, really cool. One of my favorite things for sure. You can easily unplug this thing and use that as a stylus, which is one of my favorite things to use it for. And I wish more phones had a built-in stylus like this. I think it's one of the coolest things that Samsung really engineered, and I'm glad they're still keeping it in on their newer Note phones too. Under the display, you have the home button that doubles as a fingerprint sensor and the capacitive keys on the side. On the bottom, you have a micro USB port. There's also a headphone jack on this phone, and on the back you have a glass back with a single camera setup. Now, there's no micro SD card slot on this thing, which is probably one of its biggest disadvantages. When going from a Note 4 to a Note 5, they removed the removable battery and they removed that micro SD card slot, which is really annoying. For them to do both, that's pretty crazy, but I guess somebody had to do it, and that's one of the craziest things they've done for sure. But I think this still, the Note 5, in terms of the build quality and the way it feels, still feels like a very, very good phone. It still feels like it has a lot going for it, but in terms of everyday use and even coming from a Note 4, there could be some severe downgrades. Like I stated, that micro SD card slot, that's a huge thing that a lot of phones at that time had. Even now in 2020, a lot of phones still have it, but they took it out on the Note 5, and they eventually brought it back in with the Note 8, technically the Note 7, but the Note 8, but it is what it is. I guess we're not going to freak out about it too much now. So that really pretty much covers it up in terms of the outside. There's really not much more to hit on there. Now, in terms of the software, the Samsung Galaxy Note 5 started off with Android 5.1.1 Lollipop. You are able to get Android 7.0 on it, and that's really the stopping point of this device. It's not getting any more software updates after. It's pretty much stopping where it's at. It's pretty basic at the core of it, and I was surprised because it's been been a minute since I used even an older Samsung phone. I think the S7 was the last one I really messed with besides the S6 that I remember. And with the Note 5, I was going through the software and everything, and I was like, One UI was supposed to be this pretty big change in software. It was supposed to be this huge thing that changed up and everything like that. But really, when I was messing around with the TouchWiz that's on this thing, it was like so similar to One UI. I was pretty surprised. I was expecting it to be a completely different thing, but it's really more or less the same. It's pretty basic. There's really not much going. It's pretty buggy. There's not much going for it. And in terms of the design, it's pretty outdated and it looks a little childish to me. It kind of looks like LG's UI now. Now, I think One UI has cleaned up a little bit, but I still think Samsung has a long way to go. For them to stop at One UI and think they have a perfect software, I don't think that's correct at all, and I think that's kind of weird. I think they definitely made some changes, but with this one, the software that it ended on isn't really the best software, if I'm being honest, but there's really nothing we can do about it. Now, this thing is not getting software support anymore, which is one of its biggest disadvantages, so if you're planning on picking up a Samsung Galaxy Note 5, you should either root or custom ROM it, if there are even any custom ROMs out there. I know there's a root out for this thing, but I don't think there's a custom ROM out, but that's a huge thing you have to consider when buying a phone, dude. Like, you don't want to get a phone that has outdated software, because then you're already having like an unsecured device, and you do not want to have an unsecured device in 2020, trust me. Especially with Android 10 and Android 11, those have really secured things down, and you want to have a phone that can have some sort of security behind it. And with the Note 5, because of its age, it's not really the best one in my opinion. Now, that pretty much covers it up there. Now, hitting on the performance, this thing has the Exynos 7420 octa chipset, an octa-core CPU, and there were 3 different models of this thing, a 32, 64, and 128GB model, and all those models have 4GB of RAM. And what I can tell you about the performances is that surprisingly, it's not as bad as you might think. I think when I was flying through the UI and I was going through opening settings and different things like that, it was actually faster than I thought, and that was one thing that really threw me off, because the last time I used this phone, it really wasn't that fast, and maybe it was my model or something like that. But now when I pick it up, it's actually not as bad as I thought. And I think one of the bigger disadvantages, like I said, would definitely be the software with TouchWiz. Whenever I would open something, close something, it just seemed like it took like an extra second, and I can tell there was a lot of background processes. Even now when I picked up my Note 5, I literally have like 5 apps installed and they're all games and none of them are running, and my Note 5 is heating up like crazy, which is so weird. Like, it should not be like this. And for it to be like this visibly warm when it's just sitting down on a charger, it's kind of weird. Maybe there's something wrong with the charger, but I don't think so, because I've charged every single one of my devices like that. But that's one of the craziest things with the Note 5. The heating issues are really real. But the performance thing, I mean, it's just weird that this phone is better than I thought. Now, it's not the best. Playing big graphically intensive games like Real Racing 3 and different games like that do not do it justice. It's kind of slow. It's really bogged down. Even other certain apps, there's some glitched frames here and there, but I don't think it's like the end all be all, and I don't think it's even that horrible performing of a device, if I'm being honest. I think they could definitely have done a better job, but I think at the end of the day, it's really not that bad. I'm actually pretty surprised about the performance of the Note 5. I am curious to see how good of a performing this phone is. I know I said that's so weird, when you actually custom ROM it, which I might end up doing. I want to start modifying my phones and doing updated reviews on those phones to see how well the software runs on these ones. I will probably end up doing that sooner than later, so keep a look down on the channel so you guys don't miss that. But that pretty much covers up the performance standpoint. Now, hitting on the camera, this thing was released with a single 16 megapixel camera on the back and a 5 megapixel camera on the front. And with that front camera, you are able to shoot 1440p videos on it, which is pretty surprising. On that back camera, you can do 4K videos at 30 frames, which is really, really cool, especially for an older phone like this. A lot of phones in 2015, I think they were still kind of going into that 4K realm, but a lot of them were pretty much tapping out at 1080p, if I'm being honest. I mean, the year before this, we had the iPhone 6 that tapped out at 1080p, and I definitely think with the Note 5, Samsung did a really, really good job on this phone. What I can tell you about that camera though is I think the quality is pretty good for an aged phone like this, but like I've been saying before, one of its biggest disadvantages would definitely be the fact that, it doesn't have a telephoto lens or an ultra-wide sensor, and that's one of the biggest problems with it. If you want to get a phone in 2022, you should definitely have one that has multiple camera sensors, and if you don't, that's kind of a big disadvantage. Like I said, it's just a kind of a weird thing. It's not a horrible thing, it's not a deal breaker, but that is one humongous thing to consider when you're picking up a phone like this. So quality is okay, but the lack of camera hardware features kind of make me iffy to recommend it. Now, ending it off with the battery life, this thing has a 3000 mAh battery. It has wireless charging and everything like that, which is cool, but that battery size is one of its biggest disadvantages. That is definitely one of the worst things about this phone. Samsung increased that quality of the screen, made it much brighter, made it much better, made a very good performing phone, but then they actually decreased the battery size coming from the Note 4 to the Note 5, and they enclosed it, which is so weird. So the battery life on this thing was really not the best when it came out, and it really isn't the best now. It has a lot of issues, has a lot of problems, and honestly it's one of my biggest gripes owning this phone would definitely be software, would definitely be the battery life. Now to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, should you pick up a Galaxy Note 5 in 2020? Like I've stated, I don't think I would, I don't think it's worth it. I mean, it's a good phone, the hardware is great, the software is lacking, and the battery is lacking. Those two are the things that kind of throw me off a little bit. However, if you repair those things or you get a battery case somehow or whatever the case is, no pun intended, then you'll pretty much be set. But at the end of the day, I still think like a Google Pixel 2 XL or a phone like that will probably do you better for a much longer period of time than a phone like this will, in my opinion. So if you want to pick up a Note 5 for some reason, I'll leave one link down in the description, but I would recommend picking up a Pixel 2 XL that I will also link down in the description. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. But that is pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate it if you guys could check it out. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.